The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, a relentless curtain of water that blurred the world into shades of grey. Mud swallowed boots, rifles rusted in men's hands, and the faint hum of artillery in the distance became a grim metronome, steady, patient, unending. Private Adrian Marchand sat beneath the ragged canvas of a ruined farmhouse, his hands trembling from the cold. Once, those same hands had danced across ivory keys beneath golden chandeliers. Once, applause had echoed through Parisian halls, his name spoken with admiration. Now, his fingers were caked in dirt and gunpowder, instruments of survival, not art. He looked at them for a long while, flexing them slowly as though trying to remember what they were meant for. Dreaming again, maestro, came a voice beside him. Adrian looked up. Corporal Louis Durand, his friend and fellow conscript, grinned through a mask of mud. "You'll play us something on that rifle of yours, eh?" Adrian gave a faint smile. If only it had strings instead of bullets. Louis laughed, slapping him on the back. "Then the Boches would dance to your tune." But when the laughter faded, silence reclaimed the trench. The men stared ahead, each trapped in their own thoughts, ghosts in waiting. The war had been raging for 2 years now, and the optimism that had filled the early marches was long gone. Music, art, beauty, all of it had drowned beneath the roar of the cannons. That night, as the rain eased and the stars returned timidly to the sky, Adrian heard something strange. A faint, hollow sound drifted through the darkness, delicate, uncertain, yet unmistakable. A piano! He froze, head tilted, straining to hear. The melody was broken, hesitant, as though played by a wounded hand. It came from the ruins of a nearby village, a place no one dared go after nightfall. "Louis," Adrian whispered, shaking his friend awake. "Do you hear that?" Louis groaned. "Hear what?" "More shells?" "No, music." Louis blinked at him. "Music? In this hellhole?" But Adrian was already climbing out of the trench, mud clinging to his uniform. The others muttered, calling him mad, but he didn't care. The sound was calling him, fragile, fleeting, like a memory trying to survive. He crossed the shattered fields, past corpses half buried in mud and broken rifles glinting beneath the moon. The closer he got, the clearer the melody became, a simple nocturne, hesitant but filled with longing. When he reached the ruins of the church, he saw it, a battered upright piano, its lid cracked, keys yellowed and chipped. A young nurse sat before it, her hands trembling as she tried to play. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching in silence. She turned, startled, her face pale beneath the moonlight. "Who's there?" He stepped forward slowly, raising his hands. "A friend. I heard you playing." Her eye softened with recognition when she saw his uniform. "You're French?" "Yes." "And you?" "Belgian. My name is Clara Vandenberg." She looked back at the piano, a faint smile on her lips. "It belonged to the church." I thought it deserved to sing again, even if no one listens." Adrian moved closer, kneeling beside the instrument. His fingers brushed the cracked wood with reverence. "May I?" Clara nodded. He sat, took a breath, and began to play. The first note was uncertain, dry, hollow, but the next came stronger. And then another. Soon, the ruins filled with music, hesitant at first, then blooming into something alive. The melody climbed from the dust and the dark, reaching for the stars above. For the first time in years, Adrian felt human again. When he finished, silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The dawn came slowly, crawling over the jagged skyline of the village. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of iron and smoke. Adrian sat by the broken piano, running his fingers over the keys again, half afraid the night's miracle had been only a dream. Clara stood nearby, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her uniform was worn, the Red Cross armband frayed. She had been tending to the wounded who never returned home, and now, in this abandoned church, she tended to a different kind of wound. "You play like someone who's been waiting a long time to speak," she said softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "Perhaps I have. What were you playing last night?" He paused, his fingers tracing invisible notes in the air. "A piece I never finished. I started it before the war, a symphony about Paris at dawn. Now, I suppose it's about silence instead." Clara tilted her head. "Then finish it. Let it live again." He looked at her, almost startled by the simplicity of her words. Finish it. The idea seemed impossible, and yet, it burned within him. In a place where everything died, perhaps music could still be born. For days, Adrian returned to the ruins whenever his duties allowed. He cleaned the keys, repaired the cracked pedals with wire and cloth, and wrote melodies in the margins of ration paper. Clara found him ink, candles, and even a scrap of blank sheet music from a supply wagon. At first, the other soldiers mocked him. Marchand, the maestro of mud, they'd call. "Play us a tune when the shells fall, eh?" But when they heard him, really heard him, the laughter faded. On quiet nights, men would sneak to the ruined church just to listen. They would sit among the rubble, rifles at their sides, eyes closed. For a few minutes, they were not soldiers. They were simply men, remembering home, remembering love, remembering who they were before the world broke. Clara wiped a tear from her cheek. That was beautiful." Adrian smiled faintly. "It's not the piano that's broken. It's the world around it." One evening, Clara arrived with something wrapped in canvas. "I found this in a farmhouse," she whispered. "I thought you could use it." Inside was a small violin, its strings dusty but intact. Adrian stared at it, speechless. "I can play a little," Clara admitted shyly. "My mother taught me." He nodded, smiling. "Then we'll make something together." That night, the ruined church became their concert hall. Adrian at the piano, Clara with her violin. The melody rose fragile and trembling, like a prayer whispered into the dark. When she played, her bow hand shaking, the notes wove through his chords with aching grace, two souls defying war's silence. When the final note faded, Adrian whispered, "You've given my symphony a heartbeat." "And you," she said softly, "have given this place a soul again." As weeks passed, rumors spread through the trenches of a ghostly melody drifting across no man's land. British sentries claimed they heard it after midnight. Even German soldiers on the far side sometimes paused their guns, listening in wonder. The music had no sides, no flag. It was simply human. But beauty has no armor in war. One grey afternoon, as Adrian scribbled notes onto a torn map, the distant thunder of artillery grew closer. The shelling was moving toward their sector. Louis ran into the trench, shouting, orders to fall back. "The Germans are advancing." Adrian froze. "What about the village?" Louis grabbed him by the shoulder. "Forget the damn piano. You'll die there." But Adrian couldn't. Not after everything they'd built. He turned, bolting across the field before anyone could stop him. The church was already shaking from nearby explosions. Dust fell from the ceiling as he burst inside. The piano stood where he left it, half buried in rubble, one leg splintered. Clara was there too, frantically packing medical supplies into a satchel. "Adrian, you shouldn't be here," she cried. He ran to her, helping her lift the piano's cover. "We can save it." A shell landed outside, shattering what was left of the stained glass window. The blast threw them both to the floor. When Adrian looked up, the instrument was gone, blown apart into splinters. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was filled with the ringing of silence. Clara's voice trembled. "It's over." Adrian stared at the ruins, chest heaving. "No, not yet." He reached for a scorched piece of sheet music lying among the rubble, the final page of his unfinished symphony. Half the notes were burned away. He folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat. "We'll finish it later," he whispered. "Somewhere there's still music left in the world." They fled before the next shelling began. Adrian looked back once, just once, and saw the church crumble behind them, the last echo of their melody lost in the roar of war. The retreat was chaos. Men stumbled through mud and smoke, coughing, shouting orders no one could hear. The sky was a colorless smear, trembling with distant artillery. Adrian kept one hand on Clara's arm, pulling her through the haze, until a mortar exploded not 20 meters away. The world went white. When the ringing faded, she was gone. He screamed her name into the fog, again and again, but only the wind answered. Somewhere, someone was yelling for a medic. Another shell landed closer. Adrian ran, directionless, ears bleeding, throat raw. By the time the bombardment stopped, the world had changed again. The church was gone. Clara was gone. And Adrian Marchand, the musician of the trenches, was alone. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time had no meaning in the mud. He was reassigned to a new unit farther south, but he moved through it like a ghost. He spoke little, slept less. He carried a single folded scrap of paper in his breast pocket, the last surviving page of his symphony, its notes blurred by rain and blood. At night, while the others drank or prayed, Adrian would stare at that page, humming softly. The melody was all he had left. The war had taken his friends, his music, his hearing, but not yet his memory. He began writing again, using bits of scavenged paper, charcoal, anything he could find. The men thought he was mad. They weren't entirely wrong. He'd wake screaming from dreams of pianos buried in mud, of Clara's bow shattering like glass, of music that no one could hear. One bitter night, while the others slept, Adrian stumbled outside the dugout, the cold biting his skin. He could hear distant thunder, or maybe it was artillery. His ears rang constantly now, the high-pitched whine of nerves scorched by shellfire. But beneath the ringing, faint and trembling, he swore he could hear something else. A violin. Soft, wavering, impossibly far away. Clara's song. He followed it, stumbling through the darkness, past broken fences and the corpses of trees. The music grew louder, filling his chest like a heartbeat. When he crested the ridge, he saw it, the ruins of another church, its steeple leaning, its bell half buried in rubble. Inside, moonlight spilled across a shattered altar. There was no one there. But the sound, that faint, impossible melody, still played. Adrian sank to his knees, laughing and sobbing at once. "You found it, didn't you?" he whispered into the cold air. "You finished it without me." The melody faded. Silence returned. And Adrian, for the first time in his life, understood that silence could be sacred too. He stayed there for hours, writing feverishly, filling page after page from memory. His fingers cramped, his ink froze, but he didn't stop. The final movement, the one he had never found, came to him as a whisper. A melody of loss, yes, but also of defiance. Because even when everything else dies, art remembers. When dawn broke, Adrian returned to camp. He handed his notebook to Louis, the only friend he had left. "If I don't come back," he said quietly, "make sure this reaches Paris. My address is on the first page." Louis frowned. "Don't talk like that." Adrian smiled faintly. "Promise me." Louis hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." Adrian reached for his helmet, the torn red cross armband still tied around his sleeve, the last thing Clara had given him. "Then I'll see you at the end of this symphony." That afternoon, the order came to advance. Adrian marched with the others, his rifle heavy, his hearing fading to a dull hum. As the first shells began to fall, he whispered the melody under his breath, every note clear in his mind. When the attack began, he moved forward without hesitation. And somewhere, deep in the fog, as bullets cut through the air like tearing paper, he thought he heard her again, Clara, laughing through the chaos. Then the world went silent for good. When the war finally ended, months later, Louis returned to Paris. He carried Adrian's notebook, mud-stained and blood-marked, wrapped in the remnants of a Red Cross band. He delivered it to a conservatory where Adrian had once studied, leaving it on the desk of an old professor. The man opened the cover, hands trembling. On the first page, in fading ink, was written, "Symphony for a Broken World, by Adrian Marchand and Clara Voss." The professor read the dedication below it and wept. For those who created beauty in the ruins, and for those who listened. Years later, the piece would be performed for the first time in Paris. A full orchestra. A crowded hall. When the final movement ended, there was no applause at first, only stillness. And then, slowly, people began to stand, one by one, their faces streaked with tears. Because even after all the noise, all the loss, all the ruin, the world could still remember the sound of grace.